Good day, class. So today's discussion is all about the chapter 3 of the manuscript, which is the research methodology. I'm using the book of Roger Bogie and Omar Sikaran, the 8th edition of the 2020. So what is research methodology? As what we have discussed in my previous video and in our class, we have the chapter 3 that discusses the clarity, its various components so that others may be able to go through the same process. This happen when the readers wish to replicate the study to verify the findings. So during your literature review, when you present your output, your article, you are being asked how the research was conducted. So that's why in chapter 3, it's very important to detail what is the methods you have used in order to come up with your result. So there are lots of methodology as what you have learned in the articles that have presented by your classmates. But in our discussion, I will just be giving you some of the parts or some methodology or some methods that could anchor or could help in your research. So for the research methodology, the parts of the chapter 3 for your manuscript um, usually have a research design, a research environment, a research respondents and sampling procedure, research instruments, data gathering procedure, and the data analysis procedure. So what is a research design? Research design is simple. It is refers to the strategies and methods researchers employ to carry out their research and reach valid and reliable result. So um, if you have noticed, whenever you present an article, I'm going to ask what is the research design. And commonly, the research design that be presented or in the article is usually experimental, descriptive, and previously last year you have conducted a correlational research design. So there are actually a lot of research design. And some of the research design is here experimental design, quasi-experimental design, descriptive design, correlational design, case study design, longitudinal design, cross-sectional design, ethnographic design, phenomenological design, action research design. So experimental design, because some of you will be dealing with experiment, these are experiments that usually conducted by the agriculture department or those who want to conduct some experiment. The one with your product, some of you wants to conduct an experiment to see whether the specific product is really a good product in the market. And when we have descriptive design, your market study with your output could also serve as a descriptive design describing your product. Last year, you did a correlational research design, which you have identified two variables and they have correlated with one another. So here, what is actually a research design? So a research design outlines the steps and procedure to be followed to address the research question or objectives effectively. The design determines the type and source of data, the sampling strategy, the data collection method, and statistical analysis. So research design is just a overview of your whole chapter 3. So next is we will have, okay, this is the meaning of research design. We will have the research environment. So your research environment is usually in your research environment is here in SLSU. In describing here, you have research environment talks here defines the research environment as including shared values, assumptions, beliefs, rituals, and other forms of behavior whose central focus is the acceptance and recognition of research practice and output as value worthwhile and preeminent activity. So it is the local of your research. It is where your sample is taken. Usually your sample is taken here in SLSU, in our campus. So in your manuscript, you need to explain there, why are you choosing the SLSU? For example, one of your study um is the um is the energy drink. So energy drink, does it affect the academic performance of the students? So when we have here when we have the SLSU in your manuscript, you need to explain why SLSU students are the best or why the SLSU community is the best suitable for your research. So you can explain there that here in Hinunangan, the only college that we have is SLSU. And this is the best representatives of youth because college students ranges from 17, 18 to 22. So they are commonly now using energy drink to boost their energy within the day. So you need to explain there. And why is it here in the school? Why not in the other campus? So you can just also explain because it is convenient of the researcher, and also the researcher are also students here in SLSU. So we have the research respondent and sampling procedure. So research respondent and sampling procedure, these are the respondents or individual being studied for. So you need to also explain who are the students here in SLSU. We have the what are the offered courses and how it affects the how it affects with your topic of interest. So you also need to mention the sampling procedure. We will be Sampling procedure is choosing group of individuals who will actually participate in the research from the population we have chosen. So at the beginning of our class, I let you choose a sample from your classmates. So the sampling we have conducted, you have conducted with your assignment was only a non-probability. So later on in our next slides, I will be discussing to you probability sampling procedure and also non-probability. So sampling procedure. Sampling procedure, sampling is the process of taking up a sample, right? So the population is the entire group that you want to draw conclusion about. So in example, in research, the population that you want to draw conclusion with is the SLSU community, and you want to take sample from it. Why do you want to take sample from the community? Because first is the cost. Cost of surveying is really expensive, so you try to sample. Then also the time. You cannot survey everyone given with the time that we have. So you just try to sample or take students from the population. So again, the population is the whole community of SLSU, and then you do sampling. You pick individuals who will participate in your study. So you also have the sampling frame. The sampling frame is important taking your sample because these are the list of individuals who are possible to be sample of your research, to be one of the sample of your research. So sampling frame, it's actually, in another words, this is just the list of all possible individuals. So sampling frame is the actual list of individuals that the sample will be drawn for. Ideally, it should include the entire target population and nobody who is not part of the population. So here in this case, your sampling frame is the list of all students. So if if you want to describe the whole population here in SLSU Hinunangan, so you need to get the list of all students. So you might ask it from the registrar, or you can ask it individually from the secretary of each organization. So you need to have the list of individuals. And example in here, we have an example. If you're doing a research on working condition of company X, your population is 1,000 employees of the company. Your sampling frame is the company's HR database, which lists the name and contact details of every employee. So the sampling frame, in just another words, is just the list of all individuals. If you don't have the list, then you don't have a sampling frame. And sampling frame is really important when we have the probability sampling because in probability sampling, you are giving you are giving everyone a chance to be selected as a random as a sample. Now, if you don't have the list, then you cannot do the random sampling. That's one of the misconception nowadays in research because people will say random sampling, but do they have the list? Do they have the sampling frame? If you don't have the sampling frame, then you cannot do the probability sampling. Okay? You need to have the sampling frame. Okay. Then we have the sample size. Sample size is represented by the small letter n. So the big N, as what we have discussed in our class, the big N is the population, and then the small n is the is the sample size. Now, what is the sample size? Remember, you have the you have the whole population, the all of the students. Those are population, and then the sample size are those how many students or how many person are you going to survey. So that's the sample size. In this definition, it is the number of individuals that you should include in your sample, dependence on various factors, including the size and variability of the population and your research design. There are different sample size calculators. So if you need to compute the sample size, you will have to use calculator, and it depends on the formula that we want to achieve with statistical analysis. And I will have another discussion. There's actually a video for calculating a sample size. I will put on the link below in computing a sample size. So in computing a sample size, we have a finite number and infinite number. When we say finite number, these are the population that we can count. For example, here in SLSU, we can count the number of population here because it's finite, which means we have a exact number of students who are officially enrolled here in SLSU Hinunangan. When we say infinite, these are the population that we don't have a list. For example, tourists who will go to the island and visit the island. So it is infinite because we really don't know how many people will be going there. Okay, so that is sample size. And there are particular formula that we can use for those populations. So I will have another video for it. So we have two types of sampling procedure or sampling methods. We have the probability sampling methods and also the non-probability. When we say probability sampling, these are, take note, if we have the probability sampling methods, we need the sampling frame because we are giving everyone a chance to be selected as a sample. So there is one thing I want to give emphasize. Sometimes you use random, but it's not actually random because um, you go to a certain place and then you ask a question for that particular person and then you will call him random people. Then random people is not equivalent to random sample because when we say random sample, it's really technical. You really need to have the sampling frame. You are giving everyone a chance to be selected as a sample. But if you're just going to go to SLSU and then survey everyone who is available, who is willing to answer your survey, that's not a random sample. Because when we do probability sample, you need to have the list of all the students and then you do the random sampling. Then you choose that individual and then you need to find that individual to answer your survey. So in other words, probability sampling method should have a list of possible, and then you need to find that particular person. Then when we have the non-probability, you will just go to SLSU without the list, and whoever is available, then you let them answer the survey. So that's the difference between the two. So sometimes, even though you're doing non-probability, but you will mention, oh, that's a random sample. But actually, those are not a random sample. So examples for probability sample, we have here the simple random sampling, systematic random sampling, stratified random sampling, and cluster random sampling. So all of these are random. That's why it is called probability sampling methods because of the term random. So there's no random name here, but this is actually a random also. So an example of non-probability, we have convenience sampling, voluntary response sampling, purposive sampling, snowball sampling. This is for social science, but if you also do it for natural science, such as experiment, agriculture, you can actually also do this. You can also apply this one in doing the experiment. But the methods that I am discussing to you right now is a social science, the one you're doing survey. So again, we have the probability sampling and then the non-probability sampling. So what is probability sampling methods? Probability, as I have mentioned, you are giving every member of the population a chance to be selected as a sample. And how do you give everyone a chance? So you need to have the sampling frame. Where do you get the sampling frame? You can go to the HR if you are interested with the employees. So you can go to the registrar to get the name of all students. And then the result, if you have a probability sampling, these are representative of the whole population because you're trying to give everyone a chance to be selected as a sample. So if your research, if you try to read your article and there is mentioned there, random sampling or probability sampling, you need to identify, is it systematic? Is it stratified? Is it cluster? Or is it simple? So probability sampling, again, there should be a list of all the individuals because according to the definition, you are giving every member a chance to be selected as a sample. Okay? Now, as I have mentioned, we have all of this, the 4-1 example. So what is a simple random sampling? In simple random sample, every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. Your sampling frame should include the whole population. Take note about this one. Sampling frame should include the whole population. So, if your population is the whole student in SLC Hinunangan, then you need to have the list of all students here in Hinunangan. To conduct this type of sampling, you can use tools like random number generators or other techniques that are based entirely on chance. So, entirely of chance. You can actually use a Excel. You can also use a calculator or any online application that would generate a random numbers. So I have another video that will give you an example on how to do the random sampling. So example here, we have the total population, and then you run a random generators. And when you run the random generators, it gives you number 2. So 2 now is selected as a sample. Then you run again a random number in the random generators. Then it picks number 5. So 5 now is your sample, and so on and so on, until you will have your desired sample size. Okay? I will discuss this one in elaboration during our class because I need to compute it. Then we have your systematic random sampling. When we say systematic random sampling, there is a pattern. In this example, we have the 4 participants. So the K here, this is represented by K. It is based on the researcher. If you want every 5th sample, so you can do it. Or you can have in this example, they have the 4th one. So that's why they can 1, 2, 3, 4. So the 4th is being selected as sample. 5, 6, 7, 8. So the 8 is being selected as sample. We also have the 12 because, again, in systematic random sample, you are implying a system. That's why in this case, the system of this researcher is the 4th participant. Okay. As defined, it is similar to simple random sampling, but it is usually slightly easier to conduct. Why? You don't need a random generators here. You just need to have a system. So the system is set by the researcher. So if you want the 10th one or the 4th one, it's up to you as a researcher. Every member of the population is listed with a number. So you do have the sampling frame, and then you put a number with each of the student. So for example, if you have the agribusiness department, you write from 1 to 376. And then the next department, ES. So the last number of the agribusiness is 376. So the first student of ES will be 377, and so on, until you have numbered everyone from the population. You have numbered all the students here in SLSU. It's still giving every member of the population to be selected as a sample. That's why it's still called systematic random sampling. We also have stratified sampling. So in stratified sampling, we actually have 2. We have the proportional here, proportional stratified sampling, and disproportional stratified random sampling. In proportional stratified sampling, we have here, they don't have the same numbers. Okay, they don't have the same numbers. Here, equal number of each strata. So each group is what we call a strata. One group, we call it stratum. But if we have a lot of stratum, we call them as strata. It involves dividing the population into subpopulation. Here, this is the population, but it is divided into colors. We have 3 colors here, the violet, the pink, and the gray. It allows you to draw more precise conclusion by ensuring that every subgroup is properly presented in the sample. Example, if your strata are degree programs, here in SLSU Hinunangan campus, agribusiness is 376. Just an example, and then in education, they are slightly lesser than agribusiness. So we will have proportional stratified sampling because we differ in numbers. That's why it is proportional stratified sampling. Then disproportional if you will take, even though we don't have the same equal numbers here, you can just set, okay, each one I need to have 6 in each department. So this is disproportional. But in proportional stratified sampling, you will account which one has the highest number. So if this is the agribusiness department, since we have the highest number of students, then our sample would also have the highest number of sample. But if you want disproportional, for example, if you want 10 respondents in each agribusiness in each degree program, so that is also fine. Okay? Now, to use sampling method, you divide the population into subgroups or strata based on the relevant characteristic. So you can have the strata of gender, age range, income bracket, and etc. Here in SLSU, the most appropriate one is the strata for, we will have the strata when it comes to degree program. I think that's the best strata in implementing here in this SLSU, the degree program. Okay? So the last probability random sampling is the cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is quite similar with the stratified, but in this case, we are selecting a group. So here, for example, we have clustering this one by department. This is agribusiness, in sci, education, agriculture, IT, and agroforestry. In cluster sampling, we will just select the whole population of the degree program. So in this case, the one that has been selected is this one, and also this one. So we have 3 groups, 3 cluster as part of the sample. So it involves dividing the population into subgroups. There's still a subgroups, but each subgroup should have similar characteristics to the whole sample. So in stratified random sampling, we take individuals from each group. But here, the whole group will be part of the sample. But some of the group is not part of the sample. So that's the difference between stratified and also cluster sample. This method is good for dealing with large and dispersed population, but there is more risk to error in the sample as there could be substantial difference between clusters. So cluster sampling is not also good. I would not advise you to do this one because sometimes we cannot represent, even if we conclude the whole population of SLSU, but some of the degree program were not being surveyed. So you will have a bias with it. But this is very convenient you don't if you don't have enough time to collect data. So this is the last sample for sampling procedure or sampling technique for probability sampling. We will go now to non-probability. What is non-probability? Okay, non-probability is like, it's very convenient and it is commonly used, but this will not represent the entire population. Non-probability sampling methods. In this method, individuals are selected based on the non-random criteria. So there is no sampling frame. You go to the area and then you survey. So that's why you don't have the list of names for possible respondents. So not every individual has a chance to be included. This type of sample is easier and cheaper to access, but it has a higher risk of sampling bias. So it has a higher risk of sampling bias, which means that inferences you can make about the population are weaker with probability samples, and your conclusion may be more limited. So it will not be as good as it is. So here, the first example of sampling or non-probability sampling methods is convenience sampling. We also have the voluntary response sampling, purposive sampling, and snowball sampling. Let's discuss first the convenience. From the word itself, convenience, which means convenient. So if you go to SLSU as presented in the image, you go to SLSU and those who are near to you will be automatically the sample. So you don't need the list. You don't even know them. You just go to the campus or you just go to the area and then you find those those who are convenient to you. So that is convenient sampling. But sometimes researchers are confused about doing it. They will call it random sample. But actually, that is not a random sample. That is convenient sampling because you go to that area and then you ask them to answer your survey. You don't even know who are they. Are they representative of your sample? So as defined by the book, convenience sampling is simply includes the individuals who happen to be most accessible to the researcher. So take a look at here. These are accessible to the researcher. That's why they are part of the survey or part of the sample. This is an easy and inexpensive way to gather initial data, but there is no way to tell if the sample is representative of the population, so it can't produce generalizable results. So you cannot generalize this one because they are working. I mean, they are just near to you. How about those individuals who are far from you? But then again, as defined, this is very convenient because you don't have to pay more, you don't have to wait for that person to answer your survey. That's why it is convenient sampling. Voluntary sampling. So in voluntary sampling, it is similar to convenient sample. However, based on ease access, it's still based on ease of access. Instead of the researcher choosing the participants and directly contacting them, people volunteer themselves. So um, they will say, okay, I want to answer your survey. I want to answer your questionnaire. So the result of this sample are always at least somewhat biased. So it is biased and it's not really good when we do survey, the voluntary response samplings, because you might be friends with him or they might have ulterior motive. So that's why they participate in your study. So this is actually not a good sampling technique or sampling procedure. This is commonly used, the third one, the purposive sampling. So among the non-probability, this one is really the good one, the purposive sampling, because you are choosing people from the population who are really intelligent enough or who are really have experience so that they can answer your survey. So you might set three criteria of choosing the respondents. So this type of sampling is also known as a judgment sampling. Involves the researcher using their expertise to select a sample that is most useful to the purposes of the research. So here, the study is all about the COVID-19. And then since it is purposive, you will just set criteria. First, they wanted executive. So executive will lead the during COVID-19. So you also have another criteria. And if they met that one, then they will be your respondents of your study. So again, in purposive sampling technique, you need to set three criteria. And those criteria should be in relation to your research. Okay? Then we have the snowball sampling. Some of your classmates or in the other section, they have mentioned already what is snowball sampling. As defined, snowball sampling is hard to access. If the population is hard to access, you're just new there. For example, you want to survey piggery owner, and then you don't really know who are the people who was a piggery owner in that certain area. So you do snowball sampling. What is snowball sampling? Here, you are the researcher. You go this one because the barangay captain told you to go to this person because this person is a degree owner. And then after surveying this one, you're going to ask him, do you know anyone who is also a degree owner? Then he will recommend you to another degree owner. Okay, then you go there. So in other words, when we do snowball sampling, it is based on the recommendation of your participants. The number of people you have access to snowballs as you get into contact with more people. So they might recommend a lot of people. So you don't know the total population there. You just rely on those individual you have surveyed. Okay, let's define or let's differentiate the probability and non-probability sampling. So in definition, when we do probability sampling, we are giving everyone a chance to be selected as a sample. But in non-probability sampling, not every member has a known or equal chance of being selected. Here, the example here is we have the simple random sampling, the systematic random sampling, the stratified random sampling, and cluster sampling. In non-probability, we have the convenient sampling, the snowball sampling, the voluntary samplings, and also the purposive sampling. In selection method, we have random selection, and then we have non-random selection here in non-probability. Bias level. So since you are giving everyone a chance for probability sampling, so we have a lower risk of bias. But in non-probability, there is a higher risk of bias. Okay. Generalizability. Okay. If you have the results and then you have the if you have the results, then you can conclude the entire population. For example, if you did some random sample here in SLSU, so you can conclude the entire population of SLSU because you did a random sampling. But if you did not the random sampling, you will have a limited generalizability. So that's not really a good sample. So non-probability is not a good sampling, but this is the most convenient and the cheapest one. Statistical testing. So in statistical testing, if you have probability sampling, you will have inferential statistics. But in non-probability, it's not really good to do inferential statistics here because the sample is not a representative sample. You did not take them. You did not give them the chance to be selected. You just go there and survey them. So time and cost, usually more time consuming and expensive because you need to find that specific person who is part of your survey. Then here, non-probability, faster and less cost because it's convenient to you. Whoever is available, then you will survey them. However, in probability sampling, you need to find them because they're part of your survey. They have been selected in your survey. And when to use, we use this one for quantitative research and non-probability exploratory or qualitative research. Yes, because sometimes purposive, we want a quality research or have a particular criteria. So these are the differences between the two. Then we will also have the research instrument. Research instrument is a tool used to collect, measure, and analyze data related to your research interests. So if you remember during your presentation of your questionnaire, your and the variables you have gathered, the tools that you will use, those are the research instrument. You need to identify the unit measure for those who are doing experimental, and you also need to identify the scale of measurement. You need to mention, if you are doing the questionnaire in your manuscript, you need to mention the part one, it has the demographic profile. Part two, the variables that you want to measure. You also measure the scale of measurement there, the type of data, whether it is discrete or continuous, whether it is quantity or quality, whether it is dependent or independent variable. Okay, need to mention there. So in summary, when we say research instrument, these are just the paper or the tool that you use to collect data. Okay? Okay. How to make a good research instrument? Here, a good research instrument is one that has been validated and has proven reliability. It should be one that collects data in ways that appropriate to the research question being asked. So sometimes the questionnaire will be taken from the published article, so you don't need to test the reliability. However, if you made your own research or you made your own research instrument, you will have a reliability test, which will be available in, I will make another discussion for it. And I will also like to include that when you do experimental, it should be validated by a professor or by a researcher that is aligned with your research interests. For example, if you want to do some agricultural, so you need to let your advisor or you need to let your professor check, are these all the variables that need to be gathered? Are these strong enough? Are we using the right tool? So that's how you validate the your research instrument. Okay. It also be assist in answering the research aim, objectives, and research question, as well as prove or disprove the hypothesis of the study. So if you remember back in our class, I have required you to submit your research instrument. The research instrument could be your questionnaire, and then if you're doing experimental, the variables that you need to gather, the unit measure, and also the tool in measuring those instrument. And we also have the um, questionnaire. Questionnaire could be divided based on your objectives, as I have discussed in the video that I have sent to you. And it should not have a bias in a way that data is collected, and it should be clear as to how the research instrument should be used appropriately. Um, I keep mentioning this in our class that your research objective should align with your research questionnaire. Okay, the variables that you want to measure or the research statement or the statement of the problem should be reflected in your research instrument, because your research instrument will collect data and those data will answer your statement of the problem. Okay, so they should be aligned with each other. Now, data gathering procedure. In data gathering procedure is a systematic process of gathering observation or measurement. So how do you gather your data? So if you're going to survey here in SLSU, of course, you need to have a permission to conduct a study here. Need to mention there. And I suggest that if you will put here the data gathering procedure, you need to mention that there are two or maybe one. There are two types of data that you will gather. First one is primary data. When we say primary data, these are the data that you have gathered by your own. Second one is these are secondary data. These are the data that have been published or you did not gather it by your own. So, for example, you ask the PSA, you ask the hospital to have data for your research. You're not the one who gathered the data. So we say primary data if you're the one who collected it. Secondary data if um it is from the institution. They already have gathered it. It has been utilized and it has been killed. It is clean and ready for your data analysis. So that's secondary data. Okay. Data analysis procedure. So in this data analysis procedure, you need a statistician to recommend you what are the statistical tests that you need to use. It's actually a process of systematically applying statistical or logical techniques to describe and illustrate, condense and recap and evaluate your data. So you have the research objective, which is aligned to your research instrument. Now, your research instrument should align to your data analysis. So if you have four objectives, then you have four data analysis procedure paragraph. Like in objective number one, we will use blah, blah, blah because the scale of the data is nominal and nominal. Okay, you need to mention that one. Okay, then, yep. So I guess that's all for our discussion for this week. And I hope you will update your LMS markers done if you have watched this video, and we will have a quiz next time schedule. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a very fruitful week. Bye.